Welcome to the next installment for AI Week from Zuplo. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by a friend and we actually share an investor in Yuval Neiman at Trilogy. We're joined by Gideon Mendels from Comet. He's going to talk about some AI stuff, in particular what Comet work on. They work on a bunch of interesting AI projects. We'll take a look at some of that today. We'll talk a little tiny bit about the Zuplo AI Gateway integration into one of his projects. But Gideon's just a fascinating guy all around. Talk a little bit about the story of Comet. Hey, Gideon, how are you doing?
Hey, thanks, Josh. Yeah, I'm doing good. Great to be here. Thanks for the kind intro. I'm excited to chat some AI with you.
Let's just get into it. So, first, just a brief little bit of background on Gideon. You know, who are you? How did you get into this space? What's going on with that? And then tell us a little bit about Comet. Let's start at the beginning. I know you've kind of been on a bit of a product journey and done a bunch of things in ML. So just tell us that story. It's great.
Yeah, definitely. So I started my career as a software engineer, I don't know, 17 years ago, and I shifted to working on ML about 12 years ago. Actually, it's funny enough, I worked on language models. This is before they were large nor good. At the time, it was considered like the boring task, the subcomponent of speech recognition systems. But I was in grad school, and then I was at Google. I worked on hate speech detection on YouTube comments, and we were training like a LSTM on the YouTube comment corpus. So really, like in many ways, similar approaches now, just unfortunately pre-transformer days. But someone who came from a software engineering background, and I used to have this amazing stack of tools, databases testing, IDEs, monitoring, methodologies, and then joining a machine learning team, it was quite eye-opening because really like those teams managed everything back then with like spreadsheets and emails, and it was pretty obvious to anyone who worked on it that that's truly not scalable. So
Mhm.
um, that was really kind of the origin story of Comet. We started in 2018. Our first product was focused on teams like the one I was part of. So we built experiment tracking for models. When you're training a bunch of models, you want to understand which one works better, and how do you drive kind of progress through results, hyperparameters, and so on. And then over the years, we expanded that side of the platform to essentially cover the ML ops end to end, so data set versioning, experiment tracking, model registry, model production monitoring. But then, the last 2 years have been quite a big shift in the market, and we started hearing from customers things like, "Hey, we have a new use case, but we're not going to train a model for that one. We're actually going to try to build it on top of OpenAI or Anthropic or even an open source LLM." And we still have a bunch of the same challenges. We have to experiment with a lot of different approaches, and they came to us trying to asking for things. And long story short, a year ago we launched a new product called Opik, OPIK. It's an open source product focused on really the end to end of people building Gen AI applications on top of an LLM. Right. So I'm happy to kind of dig more into that and tell you more about that. But that's a little bit of me and the company's background.
Yep, great intro. I mean, yeah, let's get into it. I know there's, I'm not an expert in OPIC, but I know there's like a number of areas of it. And I think it would be interesting for the audience to go through some of those things, how they're used, how they work. And feel free actually to just bring this up and show a demo if you like, to whatever you
Yeah.
think is the best way to explain it.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to walk through the OPIC on the kind of the managed version on Comet.com. But really important to mention, OPIC is fully open source, like truly not like everything that you see here is available in the open source. It's on GitHub. Project has been growing extremely fast. We went from like zero to almost 15,000 stars in about 9 months. And anyone wants to try that, super easy. It's like you can kind of pull the images, Docker Compose, you'll be up and running in like 2 seconds. So of course, you can get a free account on Comet.com. It's just easier for me to walk you through it. So
Yeah.
it's essentially like once you kind of get access to the product, we have support for essentially almost any LLM provider you can think of, and I don't know, 90% of the different frameworks people use to build Gen AI, agentic, RAG applications. So there's like plenty of documentation and examples on how to use it. There's Python or TypeScript or Open Telemetry if you're not using one of these languages. But it's super easy. Just to give you one example, maybe we're not going to jump too much into code, but for example, if you're using the OpenAI client, you just kind of essentially import our OpenAI integration, and then you just kind of wrap the OpenAI client with our object. And then from now on, everything you do in your application will be automatically instrumented and sent to the platform. So super, super easy to use. Of course, if you're using, LangChain or LangGraph, it's, as trivial. You add a callback and such. So, um, so that's really the integration process. It typically takes people, less than 30 seconds to be up and running. And once you got that, every interaction you'll have with your GenAI application will be instrumented and the data would send. So typically what it would look like, so I have just a project here. So in kind of like the most basic form, you can see like the inputs that went into the system. So I can click on this, for example. Let me pick something a little bit more interesting. Yeah, so I can see kind of like the inputs, the outputs. Now, if I have an agentic system, I'll be able to see all the different spans, the tool calls. We can dig into that. I think we have limited time, but generally speaking, we'll collect all that information. Now, this is super valuable in development because, especially if you're building an agentic application, you want to understand what happened in every step in the way. And it's quite hard to do with just kind of log statements. So you can very easily get that from the system. So for example, here, I can see this is using, this is instrumented on our own QA chatbot. So someone asking a question, and I can see that there's, the first step is the answer, but then there's actually a tool call to retrieve the right documentation page. So for example, a common error is like the LLM actually didn't get the context you thought it did, and then it, hallucinated an answer because it's kind of trying to pull from the weights. But here you can kind of dig into every step of this. And then another thing I could do, and this is kind of and we'll get to it in a second when we talk about quality, I can actually provide some feedback on this, right? So if I'm a PM, in this case, I define a couple metrics here, accuracy and correctness. So for example, I could say this is the correct answer. And then I'll have it in a data set where I can use, and we'll show that in a second, use for experimentation. So this is kind of like the high level dev flow. But of course, like if you're running this in production, you want to be able to see how things are behaving. So in this case, we're tracking, in this case, some basic metrics, traces, duration, token use, cost, and so on. We spend a lot of time, we can estimate cost on almost any LLM provider. But this is kind of like the high levels. Now, where I see the difference between teams that succeed in getting their GenAI application from a POC stage to something that actually works in production is really this methodology that we're really trying to support with Opik. And what it essentially entails, and this is coming from our background in ML experimentation, is you want to have a data set of sample questions and answers that that are correct. Right now, maybe the developer puts this together. Maybe you ask someone like a subject matter expert to put this together. But once you have that data set, and yeah, here's an example of a data set about some PII data. So these are just samples of generated text and answer, right? So it could be questions and answer. And this is something you can very easily kind of create. You can also use LLMs to kind of create synthetic ones. But once you have that data set, it kind of unlocks like a completely different experience. Because next time you want to make a change in your GenAI application, whether it's the prompt or you want to try a different LLM provider, you want to try a different framework, you can test this against your data set. So you actually know whether this change you made it better or worse. Now, there's obviously another component there of the metrics of like, how do I compare two things? We ship, a bunch of them out of the box. We also allow users to easily create their own, whether they're like deterministic metrics or LLMs adjust ones. But this is really what unlocks the experimentation part of the platform, which is really your opportunity to get things better. So for example, here you can see this, I'm on the experiment tab, and I can see that I have a bunch of data sets here, and for each one here, for example, we have this one open. I ran a bunch of experiments. Now each experiment here typically have a different prompt, different configuration. If it's a RAG, maybe a different chunking strategy. And I'm collecting these metrics. These are actually automatically calculated, but you can, of course, add the human annotated one. And what I could do, I could, for example, compare all these experiments and kind of see like how are they performing. Because typically, like you want to optimize for more than one metric. So obviously, correctness and accuracy is a big one, but like answer relevance, like there's a lot of things. So it's a multi-variable optimization. And like with a very quick visualization, I can see how different experiments behave. But of course, like I want to, in some cases, like dig into things. So this is an example question, and I can see how every different experiment actually responded to this. And I can expand this to look a little bit deeper. So I can actually debug and do some root cause analysis, understand where things are failing, and when they are failing, I can dig in and really look at like what happened at every step. So it's super, super powerful. All right, so we're moving relatively quickly.
Can
This
I just get
concept
a
of
question on
evaluation.
that,
Yeah, go
actually,
ahead.
Gideon? Sorry. So when I do these experiments, they tend to be run like a test suite in code where there's a fixed set of inputs and a fixed set of comparative outputs, or do you run these in production and like randomly change the models? And is it either of those?
Yeah, this is a great question. So in the dev process, it really behaves like a test suite, right? So it's kind of
Okay.
like your equivalent of unit test. You can't use unit test because it's not string matching. The answer could be
Yeah.
semantically the same, but the string wouldn't match. And then you can do like regression testing every time you ship a new version. You have confidence that it is working, but then that will get you like relatively far. You put this in production, and it will fail in mysterious ways, right? Just like the nature of these things. But that is where I can go back to the production traces, for example. So these are automatically consumed in production. I can look at samples where something, for example, failed, right? Let me pick something more interesting. um, I can look at different samples. Now if I identify this failed, for example, right, like maybe a PM looked at this, or LM as a judge flagged it, for example, I can actually add it to the data set. So now I added
Mm,
this, and I can pick my data set, the comment questions about the SDK. And now the next time I run the test suite, I have another thing to test against. So this is like this flywheel that actually allows you to improve things.
got it. Got it. Cool. Makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, I think this concept of evaluation, at this point, I think everyone agrees that this is like the best practice. This is how you get things to kind of work well. But I want to show you something else that like we do that's like very unique. Um, So essentially, what we found out is speaking to a lot of our customers doing this, and maybe just to give some color, we have over 150,000 engineers using our platform. We power
Wow.
companies like Uber, Netflix, Shopify, and many, many, many more. What we found out is a lot of this manual work of like tuning the prompt, changing the prompt, tuning like context engineering. A lot of that could be automated because essentially what we're this is an optimization problem. We have a metric that we're trying to like increase the value of, and we're making changes to hopefully get them to work better. So we actually shipped something called the Agent Optimizer. It's essentially a reinforcement learning engine, and what it does is there's a bunch of algorithm. We can walk through that if you want. But what essentially does in a nutshell is it produces a prompt candidate, tests this against the data set,
Wow.
looks at the samples that failed, and then iteratively tries a new candidate, right? So there's an LLM there that generates the prompts, but there's a lot more. We do like, the few shot optimization. And that looks something like this, right? So let's pick one of these guys. Okay, this one's completed. Okay. So essentially what I can see here, if I scroll down, that the prompt I started with is super simple. Answer the question, right? Like as basic as it gets. Now there's specific items that we're testing against. And these are like the example questions and answers that we're trying to solve for. And what the system would do, it will actually try a bunch of different prompts. Now, this is like a toy example, but you can see that, for example, it's struggling with the length of the answer. So it's kind of trying to ask you to be concise and brief and so on, direct. And it keeps trying different prompts. And what you can see here that over time, we have a bunch of these trials. Eventually, like we find a prompt that performs better. So in this case, the best performing prompt is please give a straightforward answer to the question, ensuring no elaboration is included, right? Just a toy example. But we found that prompt automatically, and we have users and customers that are doing this on like super complex system prompts. Now if it's an agent, it could be the orchestrator prompt, or you're doing the optimization for each tool separately. There's a lot that goes into this. Like everything is public in the docs. There's 4 or 5 different algorithms to do this, but this is one of the things that personally I'm the most excited about, because when you think about the shift from traditional ML to Gen AI, in many ways, we progress significantly. I don't think anyone has a doubt about that. But in one particular and quite critical way, we actually took a step backwards. So I know, Josh, you worked a lot with ML before. Um, every customer or ML team that I ever spoke to retrains their models. Sometimes it's nightly, sometimes it's quarterly, but they retrain their models with new production data. But with these Gen AI systems, no matter if you have one user in production or a billion of them, your system is not going to get better. The LLM is static, the
Mm,
prompt is static unless you manually change it, and there's no mechanism to learn from additional data.
mm,
But this is what the optimizer is solving, right? The idea is once you get to production, you see a lot of failure, you see a lot of successes, you increase that test data set, and then you can get to a point where you're doing nightly or weekly optimization jobs, get a new system prompt candidate, ship it on an A/B test for, like, I don't know, 10% of your traffic, really test it against production data, and then you can continuously improve. Now, I think that's like a huge part. Another way to solve it is with reinforcement learning, by the way.
mm.
There's pros and cons, of course, for each approach, but like a lot of the academic work on prompt optimization shows that not only that this tends to perform better than reinforcement learning in most cases, but you actually don't have to update model weights, which is quite cumbersome if you're trying to use something like OpenAI.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Huh. This is really cool. Also, it makes me think. So, I used to work in the ads team at Facebook, and it's so inevitable that this is how ads are going to work in the future, right? They're generating the artwork, the text, and they're going to drive it to the ultimate conversion point by running experiments like this in real time. Really, really,
Yeah.
very, very cool approach. So, you actually have customers running this in production, like in their production systems um, today, already running Opik. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Opik has, yeah, yeah. And another point, then we obviously spoke about this, but like another model that we see with a lot of customers is, if you have 10, or hundreds of people building Gen AI applications, often the organization kind of want to have a central location where all this data is coming in and out from. Right now, Opic doesn't do that, but it behaves well with these form of gateways, and that's like why I'm super excited about the Zuplo Gateway, because so many of our customers are like, hey, I want to be able to manage like the different LLM providers. I want to have a central location where I can eventually add things like governance and so on. So Opic, you can send the data from the directly from the app, or you can send it from the gateway. So I think what you guys are building, like, super powerful, and I know a lot of my customers are asking for that.
That's awesome. Actually, I'm gonna take that segue you just laid up for me without planning there to sort of show the Zuplo integration quickly. It's less
Oh yeah.
exciting than your demo, I think, because it's so easy to plug it in, which is the goal, right? So let me just move my windows around here, and I'll just share the Zuplo AI Gateway that we launched just this week, which is very exciting. So this is one of our AI gateways. That's the URL of it. I've already set up some things. So I set up a bunch of models like LLMs I can use, so I can quickly change those out and do different kinds of load balancing on the back. One of the nice things about Zuplo's AI Gateway is we have like a team structure. So you can have a hierarchy of teams with apps inside each team, and they can have different sort of cost limits set at different levels. At the organization level, you can have $1,000 a day budget, and then people within that can create their own apps. And if I'm just doing my hackathon project, I don't want to blow my team's budget by accidentally having a for loop in some code or something. So I can create an app for myself, which I can dispose of later, that would have a $1 per day limit. So let's just go and do that now. So I'm going to go and create an app over on our app tab. I will call it tennis chat. So the example I'm going to show here is we're actually going to hook it up to this little tennis chat application where I can ask it just questions about tennis. And I'm going to choose, let's use Gemini. I'll just use these models for now. And then I'm going to set a budget limit of $1 a day and a monthly limit of $10 a month very quickly. We have some other cool stuff like semantic caching, which can save you a bunch of money, to do semantic matching on prompts and return those from our cache instead of calling the actual model, which can make it quicker. And then basically what I do now is go and configure this, get the URL here of the gateway. Let's go and plop this in to our settings over here. And then grab the API key and paste that in. I'm going to save my settings there. And then I'd be good to go, except I want to do one more thing. I'm going to come into my policies, I'm going to add a lovely Comet tracing policy here. So I'm going to grab my API key. I know my project name is called Josh Tennis. Oh, I already set this up in Opik today. I need to just grab my API key. Nobody steal it, please. There we go. Add that policy. And if my live demo gods are with me, if I start hitting this now, like, who's your favorite tennis player, Gideon? Are you into the tennis at all?
Oh, tennis player, Roger Federer.
So tell me about Roger Federer. Hopefully it'll give us an answer to that. It's going to call the LLM, get a little bit of data about Roger, who's the, I think, most successful male Wimbledon player. So that went through our system. If I pop back up to Comet Opik here and take a look, hopefully I just have that going to show up in here on my data. So here we go. There's the request, actually. And I think you'll see, sorry, it's a little slow because of my internet, so we'll make sure that's fixed. And there we go. Tell me about Roger Federer. I think if I jump in there, I can see the answer, and then you could do all the analysis. So it's like crazy easy to hook it up into the AI Gateway. But yeah, pretty slick. Let me just stop sharing my screen. So what else is in Opik that we covered the most of the features there? That's the main areas, or some other areas that you think would be good to talk about?
Yeah, I think we've covered some of the high levels. Obviously, there's a lot more functionality. Things like how do you do online evaluation. So, we talked about, if I have, billion users, obviously we don't expect a product manager to kind of go through session by session and see what succeeded and what failed. So we can actually run online LLMs that judge and code-based evaluations against these traces. So, for example, you can define an LLM as a judge, make sure my agent is upbeat and happy, right? And then that will trace against every single trace, or you can have some kind of you can decide I only want to do it on 10% of the data. So there's a lot more, right? And the documentation is super comprehensive. Definitely recommend people just take a look. Like I said, it's fully open source and takes like 10-20 seconds to get started.
So to get started, the recommendation is go to comet.com and sign up for a free account. That's the easiest way to try it out, but they can be fully safe in the knowledge they can go and use this open source and not have to pay you a bunch of money if they don't want to. Is that right?
Yeah, the free account is truly free, so they won't have to pay us anyways. But that's the easiest way. You just kind of log in with GitHub and you can get an account. But if some people prefer to keep their data local for whatever reason, they can just run one Docker Compose call and get the entire app running on their machine. Like it might take another minute, but it's still very easy.
Got it. Okay. Last question for you, and this one
Yeah.
should be a bit of fun. So much happening in AI. It's sort of the brain is melting right now with just the speed of change and updates. Given your expertise in this area, is there anything you're particularly excited about in the AI space in general? Like what's the next thing you're kind of stoked to see? GPT-6, or it'd be like an obvious answer. But what's going on in the space that you're like stoked about?
Yeah, I mean, I think this question of like how do we customize / learn from data, for specific tasks is like the most interesting to me because the big foundation model builders they're optimizing for like a very diverse and wide kind of eval suite, right? So anything from solving math questions to like health questions to obviously powering coding applications, right? So like how that will be solved is very interesting to me. I know like Google, for example, are thinking about somehow in the realm of like mixture of experts. Like I have a math expert, I have a health expert. There's I think a lot of approaches. Reinforcement learning, fine tuning is one approach. Prompt optimization is another approach. I don't think anyone figured it out completely, and to me, that is like the biggest unlock that we will see because when you think about it, it's quite odd that we're all using the same model or same weights to solve every single task, right? Like, and we know that if we optimize for a specific task, we can get better results. But there's always a trade-off. If you optimize for this, you lose some results on the other area. So to me, that's like super exciting. I don't know exactly how it would pan out. But I also think that's where there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of companies to innovate and to essentially get better results because if all you're doing is just wrapping up OpenAI, sure you can add a lot of value in many ways, but going that extra mile is like what's very interesting for me.
You're probably just going to get swallowed up by the better model if that's your business, right? As it just
Yeah,
improves over time, you just get getting eaten up. It is hard to imagine what at the moment it feels almost like all UI could just condense into Claude and Chat GPT, right? I don't use any other interface in my world. I either talk to it in my voice or type into it. But yeah, then you start to think, really, for every possible application, is that going to be the thing? And where's the value going to get created in the app layer? Quite interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
Gideon.
And
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no. I can chat about this stuff for hours. Yeah, the UX UI part is like another huge question because I guess like text is like a very good UI for many tasks, but like when I think about we have deep visualizations in our products and comparing them and so on, it's like a picture is worth 1,000 words in many
Yeah.
cases. So and of course ChatGPT can generate visualizations, but like that is I think is an open question. Like I mean, there's like decades of research into UX and UX patterns and what's easiest for humans. Um, I don't think anyone said, "Oh, chat is the best solution," but
No.
yeah, it'll be interesting. Maybe one day we'll have full UIs, and when you click on a button, it's actually an LM and a call that generates the next page. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. No, like why couldn't the UI be generated?
yeah,
You do that today in V0 or Lovable or whatever you're doing, but it's just programmatic. What if the response to this was the ideal UI for that experience you're enticing? I mean, it seems almost inevitable, really, when you think of it like that. The user interface, if it can be rendered in real time, should be truly
yeah,
adaptive to your context, situation, whatever, and taking on best practices. But wow, what a time to be alive, I guess, is what.
yeah. What a time to be building! Best
Yeah,
time ever.
exactly,
We're very
exactly.
fortunate. Yeah.
On that note, I'll say thank you for taking the time to join us, Gideon. Good luck to everybody building. Make sure you're using Opik. Obviously, make sure you're using Zuplo AI Gateway as well. And thanks, Gideon. I'll talk to you soon. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was fun.